Assalamualaikum and very good morning to Madam Shahila and my fellow friends. We are from Group 5. We'll presenting about determination. The member of Group 5 is MOHAMAD THAQIF, MOHAMAD Mustaqim, AMALIN SHAFIKA and also NURUL FATIN SHAHIRA. The content will be discussed in this topic is suspension of works, events and consequences of default by contractor, termination on national interest, termination on corruption, payment upon suspension and termination on national interest, certificate of termination cost, and lastly, events and consequences of default by government. Assalamualaikum, my name is AMALIN SHAFIKA BINTI ABDUL HADI and I will present about suspension of work. In PWD 203A, for clause 50.1 is about suspension and resumption of work. It states that for item, the SO has a power at any time to instruct the contractor to suspend part or all of the work. B. When the contractor receives written instruction given by the SO, the contractor shall suspend either part or all of the work in the directed time. In the written instruction, it also states that contractor has to protect, store and secure the works or such part of the works against deterioration, loss or damage. Next, this is example of written instruction by SO that has been given to the contractor. Next, we continue with item C. It states that during the suspension period, the contractor shall continue to perform its obligation under this contract, which are not affected by the instruction to suspend, including the obligation to effect and maintain insurance and performance bond. D. The SO may instruct contractor to resume the work at any time. After contractor receive instruction by SO to resume the work, contractor shall resume the works again and will examine the work affected by the suspension. The contractor also must repair any deterioration or defects or loss of work that occurs during the delay and take all necessary actions to mitigate the expenses incurred.
So, hi, Assalamualaikum. For today, I want to present about events and consequences of default by contractor in clause 51. So, event of default by the contractor in PWD, we can look at the clause 51.1a and for PAM, clause 25.1. So, for PWD clause 51.1a, fails to commence works at the site within 2 weeks after the date for possession, suspend or abandons the carrying out of the works or any part thereof for continuous period of, fails to proceed regularly and diligently with the performance of his obligations under the contract, fails to execute the works in accordance with the contract, persistently neglect to carry out his obligation under the contract, refuse to comply with a written notice from the SO in relation to any defective work or equipment, materials or goods, fails to comply with the provision of clause 47 and also fails to comply with any term and condition of the contract. So for PAM clause 25.1, the contractor fails to commence the works in accordance with the contract without reasonable cause, and he wholly or substantially suspends the carrying out of the works before completion. He fails to proceed regularly or diligently with the works. He neglects to comply with an AI. He fails to comply with the provisions in clause 17, and also he has abandoned the work. Then for the termination, termination in PWD, we can look at clause 51.1b, and PAM we can look at 25.2. So in PWD, the government shall give written notice to the contractor specifying the default and requiring the contractor to remedy such default within 14 days of the receipt or any period determined by the government. If contractor fails to remedy the breach within such period, the government shall have the right to forthwith terminate his contract. So for the PAM, upon the occurrence of any default under clause 25.1, the employer or architect on his behalf shall give written notice to the contractor, which is delivered by hand or by registered post specifying the default. If the contractor continue with such default for 14 days, then the employer may within 10 days from the expiry 14 days can forthwith determine the employment of the contractor under the contract. So this is consequences of terminations. We have two. First one is contractor and second one is government. Consequences of termination can found at the clause 51.1c. If this agreement is terminated under clause 51.1b, so the contractor shall forthwith cease all operation of the works, carry out any protection work so as to secure the site, equipment, goods, material therein against any deterioration, loss or damage, and to do all things necessary so as to leave the site in a clean and tidy. Third one, remove its personnel and workmen from the site. Remove all temporary buildings, plant, tools, goods, and unfixed material which have not been paid the government by the government. And last one is either allow such third party to enter into a contract with the government or any person deemed necessary by the government for the purpose of completing the work. So consequences for the government. First one is call upon the performance bond or forfeit the performance warranty sum. This is example of performance bond. Next, enter and repose the site. Third one is be entitled to carry out and complete the works on its own or employ any other person to carry out and complete the works. Last one is be entitled to claim against the contractor for any loss, cost, expense, and damage suffered as a result of termination of this contract in the manner provided under clause 56. So for the general default, we can found at clause 51.2. If at any contract period, the contractor becomes bankrupt, the contractor also becomes insolvent and compounds with or enters into an arrangement or composition with its creditors. Third one is a provisional liquidator, receiver or manager of its business or undertaking duty appointed or position taken by or on behalf of creditors or debenture holders secured by a floating charge of any property comprised in or subject of the floating charge. And the last one is execution is levied against a substantial portion of the contractor assets. So then the government shall have the right to terminate the contract forthwith by giving notice to that effect. So next is consequences of termination in clause 51.2b. First one is in the event the termination of this contract under clause 51.2 takes place, clauses 51.1c 1 Roman and 51.1c 2 Roman shall apply. Last but not least, for the avoidance of doubt, the parties hereby agree that the contractor shall not be entitled to any form or loss, including loss of profit, damage, claim, or whatsoever upon termination of this contract under this clause. That's all for me. Thank you.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Mustaqim by Abdullah, and today I'm going to present about termination on national interest, which is clause 52, and termination on corruption, unlawful and illegal activities, clause 53. Next, we move to clause 52.1, which is termination. For the subclause A, it states that the government will give written notice within less than 30 days about the termination. If the government considers that such termination is necessary for national interest, national policy and national security, without any reason, the contract will be terminated immediately. Okay, next we move to clause 52.2, which is consequence of termination. Upon such termination of this contract under clause 52.1, payment obligations including all costs of expenditure incurred by the government and the contractor shall be ascertained in accordance with clause 54 and clause 51.1 C1 and clause 51.1 C2 B and C. Okay, next we move to clause 53, which is termination on corruption, unlawful or illegal activities. For this clause, it says that without prejudice to any other rights of the government, if the company, its personnel, servants or employees is convicted by a court of law for corruption or unlawful or illegal activities in relation to this contract or any other agreement that the contractor may have with the government shall be entitled to terminate this contract at any time by giving immediate written notice to that effect to the contractor. And lastly, for clause 53.2, it says that upon such termination under clause 53.1, the government shall be entitled to all losses, costs, damages and expenses including any incidental costs and expenses incurred by the government arising from such termination. And next, B, it says that clause 51.1 C, 1 and 2 shall apply, and for the avoidance of doubt, the parties hereby agree that the contractor shall not be entitled to any other form of losses, including loss of profit, damages, claims or whatsoever upon termination of this contract. And that's all for me. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Next, payment upon suspension and termination on national interest. Under clause 54 in PWD 203A, for clause 54.1 states that if the contract is terminated under clause 50, which is suspension of work, or clause 52, termination on national interest, there are some payments that need to be made by the client to the contractor shall be the following these 5 items. As for item A, value of work done before the date of determination. For example, if the work has been done for 50%, the client may pay 50% to the contractor. Next, B. Any preliminary items such as hoarding or BQ, so far as the work or service comprised therein has been carried out or performed, and a proper proportion of any such item where have been partially carried out or performed. C. The cost of material or good reasonably ordered for the work which have been delivered to the contractor or of which the contractor is legally to accept delivery. D. A sum being the amount of any expenditure reasonably incurred by the contractor insofar as such expenditure has not been recovered by any other payments referred to in this sub-clause. E. The reasonable cost of any protection works and removal of equipment and site facilities pursuant to termination as provided under this contract, provided that such amount to be paid by the government shall be confined only to those items as are clearly and expressly stated in sub-clause A until E above. For clause 54.2 under 203A states that for the avoidance of doubt, the party agree that contractor shall not be entitled to any other form of losses including loss of profit, damage, claims or whatsoever other stipulated under clause 54.1, which is item A until item E. The parties further agree that the amount agreed above by the government shall constitute as a full and final settlement between the parties. Next, 54.3. Upon termination of the contract under clause 50 and clause 52, a final account of the contract shall be prepared and issued by the SO.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is NURUL SHAHIRA BINTI ROSLI and I will present about Certificate of Termination Costs and Events and Consequences of Default by Government. Certificate of Termination Costs is stated in PWD 203A in Clause 56. As you can see from the slide, Clause 56.1 states that SO may proceed with a written certificate stating the completion cost and the final account after all the works has been evaluated. This will be reviewed in terms of first, work done following the termination of the contractor's employment, second, the engagement of other contractor or persons, third, the amount of direct loss or damage to the government due to the termination by SO. For clause 56.2, it states that completion cost consists of 5 things, which is amount paid to the contractor by the client, payment paid or payable to third parties engaged by the government to fulfill the work, sum paid to the subcontractor or supplier, cost of expenditure or on-cost charged by the government, and the last one is the total amount of loss or damage caused by the client due to the termination of contract. Clause 56.3 states that the final contract sum consists of amount paid under the contract on completion, any variation which resulted in any adjustment of the original contract sum, and any addition by the client or government under the terms of contract to be deducted from the original contract sum. Clause 56.4 explains that in the Certificate of Termination Costs, comparison between the final contract sum and the completion cost should be stated. For Clause 56.5, it explains that the Certificate of Termination Costs should be same and certain on the contractor as the amount of the loss or damage included. The last clause under this topic is Clause 56.6. It states that allowance should be paid for the amount such as first, cost and expense made by the government, second, cost of supervision, third, interest and depreciation of plant, and lastly, other usual overhead charge and profit. Next, I will explain about event and consequences of default by government, which is also in PWD 203A at Clause 55. In Clause 55A, events of default happens when government fails to solve the default period specified in the notice in within the stipulated, then the contractor may issue a notice defining the default by the government to solve the issues within the stipulated time. Then the government considers the remedy to be carried out and may be agreed by both parties from the date of the notice. Clause 55.0b, termination happens if the government fails to solve the default period specified in the notice in within time stipulated. The contractor have the right to terminate the contract by proffering written notice to that effect. The last one is Clause 55.0c, consequences of termination. If this contract is terminated, payment covered to the contractor would be A. Value of work that done before the date of termination, B. Any preliminary items or works or services that has been complete. C. Goods and materials that has been ordered, delivered or received by the contractor. And D. Any amount of payment that has been made by the contractor. Thank you.